Hey everyone, it's Kate from Facebook. No, Kate from Sleep Time Baby. This is definitely live, isn't it? By the way, I'm back on again. I'm live on Instagram and I'm live on Facebook, so I will try and make sure that I'm covering both off. But today is day 2 of the 5-day sleep challenge. So yesterday we talked a bit about sleep education. We talked about sleep cycles and we talked about sleep props to help you identify what might be going on with your little one. That was the whole idea. So I asked a question this morning about what your sleep prop was and whether you thought that might be causing you problems. So there's been some great interaction on that. So thank you for sharing, because what that will help me to do is when we come to talk about how to address certain things like night wakings and daytime issues, that will help me to make sure I'm covering all of those things off. So brilliant, thank you very much for all your bits and pieces going on. So today we're going to talk a bit about bedtime routines and a bit about self-settling. This is probably going to come in at various points during the week, because self-settling, as I mentioned yesterday, is the really key thing to consider when it comes to your child and their sleep. If they've got a problem, remember, it's all about your journey. So firstly, I just wanted to talk about your child's sleep environment. So if you have a child that's under the age of 1, it's really, really important that you've considered all of the advice that comes across from people like the Lullaby Trust about how to set up your child's sleep environment. But a lot of those things actually will ride through into older ages as well. So it's also Safe for Sleep Week, if you didn't know, from the Lullaby Trust. So they are have a big campaign on this week, which I shared yesterday, all about co-sleeping. But basically, you want to make sure that your child follows their recommendations, because it's all about avoiding the potential of SIDS. So one of the most important things is about the room temperature, and this often is the thing that people get slightly worried about. They can get worried about it from a point of view of actually it being too cold in the room, too hot in the room. So what you want to do is make sure that your child's room is between the temperature around about 16 to 21 degrees. So somewhere in that range is great. Make sure that they've got the appropriate level of cover. So it's not recommended to use a duvet or pillow before the age of 1. But after that, you want to be looking at making sure they've got the right tog level and the right coverage in terms of the either the sleeping bag or the duvet that you're using. So a good, simple environment is the key thing. I don't think that a cluttered cot or bed that's full of toys is a great sleep environment. So what you want to be doing is keeping it a simple sleep space. That's the real ideal thing. If they have one teddy or one comforter, that's fine. But if you've got multiple teddies that might get used as a distraction, throwing, playing, whatever it may be, then I'd remove them from the environment. Simple sleep environment. Now, rooms, in terms of what they look like, decorate them as much as you would feel is appropriate for the child, but make sure you're setting up so it's a sleep place, so that there's not toys strewn everywhere. Don't get confused about being a play space versus a sleep space. So environment is really key to get right. Darkness is your friend in terms of children's sleep. So try and encourage your child's room when it's sleep time to be as dark as possible. I'm talking blackout to the max, really. So you want it to be a 9 and 10 out of 9 and 10 level of darkness during the night time. During the daytime, it's probably going to be a bit less. But you want to consider how you can make your child's room as dark as possible. There are things like the Grow travel blind, which I've got one of those to give away, and I'll be launching the competitions later. And you can put those up to create a different level of darkness behind your blackout curtains. Blackout blinds can be good, but there's often a little bit of light bleed around there. So you want to think about how you can block out that light to make sure that your room is as dark as possible. Really, really important from an environmental point of view. In terms of older children and light levels, it is possible that you can have a night light in the room. That's actually something that sometimes they can get. Sometimes children over the age of about 2 can get a bit scared of the dark. So use a night light if you want, but make sure that it is a warm colour. So no blue lights. Apart from the Grow clock, which we will talk about when it gets to the night time, which we're going to talk about tomorrow in terms of night wakings. So a night light can be good to help them to settle. So make sure that you're kind of choosing the right bedtime for your child. Now, it does vary as they get older. If you've got a newborn, I would suggest that you're kind of in the sort of the first time of 10 weeks, you can get away with them going to bed a bit later, like, you know, kind of 9, 10 o'clock. Because if you can get them to go to bed a bit later, then it means you can sleep at that same sort of time and you're more likely to get some rest yourself. But when they get kind of past that stage, so normally that's around sort of about, like I say, 10 weeks, you want to get into that cycle of getting them to go down at the same time each night, so that they can actually recognise when bedtime's coming. And that's all about the body clock, which we talked about yesterday. So the right bedtime for them needs to be adjusted by age. So you might find that it gets a bit later as they get older, but it doesn't vary that massively. I'm just going to have a quick drink of water before I choke over my words. So for example, I would say a 7 o'clock bedtime is probably valid until at least the age of about 3. Now, you might find that varies with the naps, and we'll talk about that when it comes to daytime. But don't be thinking that putting your child to bed later is going to help them to sleep better, because it just won't. Put it in context, my 9-year-old daughter goes to bed at about 8 o'clock. So even when you get to kind of that age, it's not that much later than you think. So keep an eye on sort of bedtime and what time it should be relative to their age. Now, overtiredness is the killer along children's sleep. It's really one of the biggest problems that I kind of face when I talk to people about their children's sleep. So try and avoid overtiredness. Overtiredness is actually the production of a hormone called cortisol, and that's kind of, it's sort of a little bit like baby Red Bull, and we want to avoid it like the plague. So avoiding overtiredness means that getting your child to go to sleep at the right time will help them to settle better. If your child goes to sleep overtired, they're more likely to wake in the early part of the night and actually in the lighter sleep stage of the night. And that's just because the cortisol in their bloodstream stops them from kind of getting into that kind of deep sleep, and it can raise them into kind of more wakeful moments. So if you feel like your child is overtired, and that can happen at any age, get them to go to bed earlier. Don't be afraid of an early bedtime. It's often the first thing that I will change in a child's regime rather than a later bedtime. So make sure you're kind of aware of that. Now, from a routine point of view, routines are brilliant. Many people will say this, and it's great to have a routine from an early age. So that can be anything from, you know, a few weeks old. But the reason for routines being good is because they start as signals. So if you do a journey to sleep, each night being similar, then your child will start to recognise what that journey to sleep is. So when you've got a younger child, you can't really sort of, you know, a baby of under a year, it's not really as if you can kind of talk them through what you're doing, because they won't necessarily be able to respond back. So keep your routine consistent, because it will show them that a similar thing will happen each night. When you've got an older child, you can do something like kind of drawing out their routine. So this is an old version of something that I put together for clients. It's kind of actually taking you on that journey to sleep in terms of what happens at each stage, so you can keep them on track. And the idea around that really is that then you can tick off all the bits as you kind of go along, so that they know what's kind of coming next. It's very visual. You can start to sort of talk about, okay, we're going to spend 5 minutes in the bath, especially if you've got kids that love the bath. Mine are a bit like that. They don't want to get out. It's like, no, time is gone. We set it for 5 minutes together. You need to jump out of the bath. So you can use those things to your advantage to keep that routine on track and show them visually, because at the end of it, you want it to be saying, we're getting into bed and going to sleep. That's the kind of the most important thing to be doing. So yeah, draw out your routine with your older child, and so that they feel engaged with it. That can really help in terms of showing them what you're trying to get to do. Now, we then get to kind of bedtime itself, and this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of self-settling here. So self-settling is the most important thing that I think is worth considering if you've got sleep issues, because if you've got a child that is kind of needing help to go to sleep, then it's maybe going to be the thing that gets them to wake up in the night when they're looking for that thing. We talked about that yesterday, is the whole idea around sort of sleep props. So what I want you to consider is how your child is falling asleep at the moment, and how you're going to kind of transition into self-settling, and that needs to be your kind of journey really, and what your decisions are. So the way that I talk about this is trying to give you a kind of a range. So I'll talk about that quickly, and we'll probably come back to it again on other videos. But there is one end of the spectrum, which is cry out, right? So cry out, the purest form of that is getting your child ready for bed, putting them down into their sleep space, and then leaving them, and then they settle. Now, that can involve a lot of crying. I'm not a big fan of it. People will use it because they kind of find that sometimes it works or it's a bit lost, but I'm not sure how much it teaches the child. So on the other end of the scale is the kind of no cry solution, which means that you're literally stopping your child from showing any kind of form of protest and probably helping them to settle by holding them, but then that's a prop anyway, but you want them to self-settle. So it's all a bit kind of confusing really in terms of how that can work for me. So I think my recommendation normally is to sit somewhere in the middle, stay with your child, help them to sleep, but try not to be the thing that gets them to go to sleep. So that might mean interacting them with them for a little while. That might mean doing a gradual retreat method, so moving further away. It might mean that you have to pick them up every few minutes and put them back down again. It might mean that you have to stay with them to kind of keep them calm. But find your way of kind of keeping them calm as much as possible, kind of making sure that they're settling and trying to ensure that they're settled on their own. That's kind of the shortcut version of kind of what I would suggest in terms of self-settling. So hopefully that gives you a kind of a view on what to do around that area. So getting your child to kind of settle at nighttime in a calm kind of way as possible is going to be one of the most important things to help them to be able to sleep for longer in the night. That's the kind of the idea with it all. Just a quick note, because I noticed a few people are kind of feeding to sleep or rocking to sleep. The feeding one can be the most difficult to sort of address. And what I suggest you do, and the reason for that is because you're holding your baby, whether you're bottle feeding or breastfeeding, you're often holding your baby. So therefore, letting go of that can be more difficult. So maybe what you want to do is kind of move, if you're feeding to sleep, move to kind of holding to sleep, then perhaps rocking to sleep and then putting them down into the cot. So move on a gradual kind of process with that. Everything else I would suggest is easier to kind of go slightly more cold turkey on. So a dummy, for example, do it, get rid of it if you think that's causing you problems, and then in a couple of days it's probably going to have disappeared from what they know what's going on. So bear that in mind. So those are kind of my thoughts on self-settling. Hopefully that gives you kind of a view of what you might need to change in all of that. Now, the last thing I wanted to sort of touch on was older children, and from that I kind of mean if you've got a child that's showing more anxiety around bedtime, then make sure you're kind of working with them. Work that anxiety through. I talk about things, maybe do some yoga, maybe do some meditation. Make sure that you're kind of avoiding blue light around bedtime. So no screen time, an hour at least before bedtime. And that goes for kind of younger children as well, because you do not want them to be consuming the blue light, which will stop them from feeling sleepy. It's quite a well-known fact, and it's kind of been going around at the moment. So older children, you want to kind of make sure that you're setting them up in the best way. Avoid kind of strenuous exercise before bedtime. That means kind of late football activity, something along those lines, just to make sure that you're giving them the best opportunity to settle. But really you're looking at kind of creating a calm bedtime environment in a nice sleep space with the right state of tiredness to then settle calmly and hope that they will then go to sleep nicely. So what I wanted to do today was give you kind of that overview and give you some ideas around what you might want to change around your kind of bedtime routines and kind of an aim towards sort of self-settling. What we'll do is tomorrow we'll talk about kind of what happens in the night and how to kind of respond to them and what that means for different ages. So night times will be the next thing to talk about. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be posting that into the kind of the groups, onto my stream and Instagram. I'm sending it out to the email subscribers as well. And keep an eye out because I'm going to launch the competitions later on today. So take care. Have a lovely, if a bit rainy and windy afternoon, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Bye bye.